Chapter 2, Section 11 of The Greek View of Life by Goldsworthy Lowes Dickinson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Chapter 2, Section 11. Sceptical Criticism of the Basis of the State. Having thus supplemented our general account of the Greek conception of the state by a description of their two most prominent polities, it remains for us in conclusion briefly to trace the negative criticism under whose attack that conception threatened to dissolve. We have quoted in an earlier part of this chapter a striking passage from Demosthenes, embodying that view of the objective validity of law under which alone political institutions can be secure. "That is law," said the orator, "which all men ought to obey for many reasons, and especially because every law is an invention and gift of the gods, a resolution of wise men, a corrective of errors, intentional and unintentional, a compact of the whole state, according to which all who belong to the state ought to live." That is the conception of law which the citizens of any stable state must be prepared substantially to accept, for it is the condition of that fundamental belief in established institutions which alone can make it worth while to adapt and to improve them. It was accordingly the conception tacitly at least accepted in Greece during the period of her constructive vigour. But it is a conception constantly open to attack. For law, at any given moment, even under the most favourable conditions, cannot do more than approximate to its own ideal. It is at best but a rough attempt at that reconciliation of conflicting interests, towards which the reason of mankind is always seeking. And even in well-ordered states there must always be individuals and classes who resent, and rightly resent it, as unjust. But the Greek states, as we have seen, were not well ordered. On the contrary, they were always on the verge, or in the act, of civil war; and the conception of law as a compact of the whole state, according to which all who belong to the state ought to live, must have been at the least severely tried in cities permanently divided into two factions, each intent not merely on defeating the other, but on excluding it altogether from political rights. Such conditions, in fact, must have irresistibly suggested the criticism which always dogs the idea of the state, and against which its only defence is in a perpetual perfection of itself: the criticism that law, after all, is only the rule of the strong, and justice the name under which they glose their usurpation. That is a point of view which, even apart from their political dissensions, would hardly have escaped the subtle intellect of the Greeks; and in fact, from the close of the 5th century onwards, we find it constantly canvassed and discussed. The mind of Plato in particular was exercised by this contention, and it was, one may say, a main object of his teaching to rescue the idea of justice from identification with the special interest of the strong, and reaffirm it as the general interest of all. For this end, he takes occasion to state with the utmost frankness and lucidity the view which it is his intention to refute, and consequently it is in his works that we find the fullest exposition of the destructive argument he seeks to answer. Briefly, that argument runs as follows: it is the law of nature that the strong shall rule, a law which everyone recognises in fact, though everyone repudiates it in theory. Government therefore simply means the rule of the strong, and exists, no matter what its form, whether tyranny, oligarchy, or democracy, in the interests not of its subjects but of itself. Justice and law are the specious names it employs to cloak its own arbitrary will. They have no objective validity, no reference to the well-being of all. And it is only the weak and the foolish on whom they impose. Strong and original natures sweep away this tangle of words, assert themselves in defiance of false shame, and claim the right divine that is theirs by nature, to rule at their will by virtue of their strength. Each government, says Thrasymachus in the Republic, has its laws framed to suit its own interests, a democracy making democratic laws, an autocrat despotic laws, and so on. Now, by this procedure, these governments have pronounced that what is for the interests of themselves is just for their subjects, and whoever deviates from this is chastised by them as guilty of illegality and injustice. Therefore, my good sir, my meaning is, that in all cities the same thing, namely the interest of the established government, is just, and superior strength, I presume, is to be found on the side of government. So that the conclusion of right reasoning is, that the same thing, namely the interest of the stronger, is everywhere just. Here is an argument which strikes at the root of all subordination to the state, setting the subject against the ruler, the minority against the majority, with an emphasis of opposition that admits of no conceivable reconciliation. And as we have noticed, it was an argument to which the actual political conditions of Greece gave a strong show of plausibility. How then did the constructive thinkers of Greece attempt to meet it? The procedure adopted by Plato is curiously opposed to that which might seem natural to a modern thinker on politics. The scepticism which was to be met, having sprung from the extremity of class antagonism, it might be supposed that the cure would be sought in some sort of system of equality. Plato's idea is precisely the contrary. The distinction between classes he exaggerates to its highest point. Only he would have it depend on degrees not of wealth but of excellence. In the ideal republic which he constructs, as a type of a state where justice should really rule, he sets an impassable gulf between the governing class and the governed. Each is specially trained and specially bred for its appropriate function, and the harmony between them is ensured by the recognition on either part that each is in occupation of the place for which it is